Okay, hello, hello. Happy Monday. And this week, I really wanted to talk about something that was a big conversation I had with my one of my one-on-one clients. And it's something that really hit home and resonated for my own journey too, as I was making new choices and diving into baby steps when it came to new habits and leaning into a deeper identity of who I desire to become essentially. And all of that really leans to planning. And you're probably like, okay, like, well, what do you mean by that? So I think of, when you think of planning and following through, whether it's habits, whether it's like completing a project, whether it is staying consistent with workouts or healthy habits, like things like that, like not just, one action, but the repeated pattern over time and structuring our lives. And ultimately, that's really how we, you know, create long-term habits and behavior change is when we set ourselves up for success. But in the beginning of that process, it can feel so daunting. And we can get into this trap of not following through on the actions that we want to take when we're wanting to build these new habits in our life. And so, you know, this was one of the things that my one of my one-on-one clients had shared with me recently, is that they were, gave me a specific example. They were playing video games instead of working out. And I said, like, what problem is that video game playing solving in that moment? And she said, avoiding structure. Like I set this goal of making this plan to work out, and I was avoiding it. And then we really dove deeper into that and really wondering, okay, like, why avoid structure? Like, where is that really coming from for you? And, like they explain, because structure feels like taking responsibility, and that feels scary. And ultimately, they didn't feel ready. And so we dug a bit deeper into that. And, there's definitely many factors at play than just that immediate moment. And, in these moments, it's really key to assess our circumstances, our environment, things that could have potentially affected how we think, feel, and act in that moment. Whether we're looking at, okay, what happened an hour before that event, of like making that decision, what happened that morning, what did I eat, how was my sleep, like really getting that objective data can be super beneficial of just understanding that specific moment in itself. But overall, there can definitely be a deeper layer of our own assumptions and experiences when it comes to that particular thing. So when I was coaching and supporting my client through this, like we really talked about feeling stuck in this child mentality and others doing things for her. And, like we talked a bit deeper about like growing up, choices weren't really available, and the structure was already set in stone outside of her control. And, even when she tried to make her own choice, that could get backlash as well. And so it's really allowing ourselves to know and catch what types of experiences we have with that particular thing. So I also want to say, like, one of the sneakiest things that we can get caught up in these exact individual moments is that we assume that the us planning or building the structure will solve our habits. But the thing is, if we haven't really been a planner before and created our own form of structure before, which is a skill that, we might have actually more trouble navigating than the habit itself, you know, we might not see that in that moment. And that can really allow us to kind of go down this thoughts process of thinking like, oh, I suck at this habit because I don't follow through on it when I set it in stone or I put it in when I plan it, when in reality, there are those other factors at play outside of the habit itself that we can address kind of firsthand, right? And so I wanted to share this story too because it really hit home for myself because when I think of my experience of even just looking at, Sonia 5 years ago, I did not structure my days. I did not plan things. I very much was like, I'm so good at winging it. I don't need to plan. And that was ultimately like the core identity I latched onto of being like, I don't need to plan. Like, I know how to navigate things. Whenever it happens, it happens. Like, I've got it. And I really latched onto that. And it's so interesting because when I think of myself 5 years ago, I had no morning routine. I had no night routine. Like, there were no boundaries that I set with myself at all. And overall, when I think about myself and in that process, is that I I was basically just like flying at the seat of my pants, like I was just like, this is fine. This is just who I am. And one, that made me think as well about, my childhood and how I grew up, and there were no boundaries, there was no structure. And so going back to this idea of, I wanted to have routines, I wanted to have structure, but it was terrifying. It did feel uncomfortable, but it also felt like this thing where I was just supposed to know how to plan. Like, it doesn't seem like quote unquote a big deal, right? Like, if you plan it, you can follow through on it. Like, it seems like this simple concept and idea, but we might not have actually built the skill of planning and structuring ourselves before, which actually makes it feel way harder initially to follow through on those habits that we are trying to make these plans for. So, when I was working through this with my client, it was really powerful for her to really lean into this and realize all of the other factors that were at play. And then that could really allow her to ease into that and give herself more grace and kindness in those moments to realize, like, sometimes we might not have been modeled those behaviors. And when we go on these journeys, like, our brain is going to be like, what are you doing? Or why are you trying to do that? And our brain can become rebellious, right? And like not want to do those things because we've always done it another way, aka not planning, and that feels safer, that feels more comfortable for our brain to do. So that's really where our brain is going to jump into and lean into. And that kind of ties into this, component of instant gratification and indulgence and wanting to avoid those uncomfortable pieces of creating this new skill of how do I plan my day? How do I build that structure? And also, how do I follow through on it? So, I wanted to kind of just share this in like a big context of like, let's say I want to start working out 3 times a week and eating healthy. If I jump on this bandwagon to like all of a sudden work out 3 times a week and eat healthy, and let's say I time block my week to be like, okay, these are all the days I'm going to work out, and these are all the ways that I'm going to eat healthy. And I've never done that before, and I've never put this thing in my schedule. And now it's like, imagine I now have this like very full calendar that's basically time blocked of like all of these things that I'm going to be doing, and it is full. And honestly, like, when my brain looks at that for the very first time, my brain, one, is just like, that's crazy. I don't need to follow that. Two, my brain is basically like, that looks so daunting and a lot of responsibility. to follow through on. Like, there's just so many things that I have to do in that moment, and is going to make me want to avoid it altogether. And three, it's really like, it's not giving myself that room to grow and understand like what will work for me, and making that like trial and error process doable and realistic. So I wanted to share this as a whole process to really think about if you are wanting to plan and set yourself up for success, and you see all these strategies online, and like maybe you read a book on this, or maybe you saw something on Instagram and you saw somebody else and how they do their morning routine, and you're like, oh yeah, like I'm going to take all of these steps and set myself up for success and plan and put these things in my schedule. And then at the end of the day, it's like you don't follow through on it. And then you're like, well, why didn't I go to the gym? Why didn't I eat that healthy thing? And then we fixate on the habits, and we kind of miss that fact of, if I haven't gotten accustomed to planning and building structure in my life, that might be the area to tackle first, rather than utilizing it as quote unquote this tool, which is something so foreign and so new to my brain, for my brain to get behind, that it's not the habit that's the problem. It might be the tool that we're using. So, you know, I actually put this in my email last week to my email list, which I got a lot of amazing feedback on these amazing 10 journal prompts that I shared. And some of them that I put in there was, what do I believe in? And do my choices reflect those beliefs? And if not, what am I afraid of? I think these are three really powerful questions. And actually, the fourth question there too was, how can I embody these beliefs just even by 1% more? And I bring this up because when I think back to like 5 years ago, Sonia, what did I believe in? I really didn't believe that I was a planner. I really didn't believe that I was somebody that structured my day. I didn't. And so I wanted to believe in that. But then did my choices reflect those beliefs? No. I didn't set morning routines for myself. I didn't create my lunches for healthy meals. Like, I was just literally, I was so reactive in my life. Like, I did not set myself up for success. I was not proactive. I did not create steps in my day to build up to being successful with taking action on those things. And so I really wanted this episode to be a moment to reflect on types of tools that we jump in to utilize. I mean, that's like a whole other topic for another day, but this particular one I'm talking about is like planning and structuring our day. Like, sometimes we want a time block and we put every single thing into our calendar thinking that that's going to make us successful and make us follow through. But if we've never done that before and we fill our calendar like 110%, like, that in itself is going to overwhelm our brains, our bodies, our nervous systems. And whenever we're trying something new, we have to give ourselves that little leeway of grace to say, you know what, let's take those baby steps. Let's start with just tomorrow. I'm going to put, at 5:30 tomorrow, I'm going to go to the gym. Let's start with like one piece, one day, and really just see how that goes, of how it feels to incorporate that and set that in stone. And something that also helps with this, that I share in my Redefine collective, that there's a whole video and strategies talking about it, which is implementation intentions, which is a more concrete and solidified way to establish your planned structure around your habits and how to go about implementing it. And if you want to hear more about that, by all means, come join us. It's a year-long mentorship with tons of resources and community, and it's so amazing. And so really allowing yourselves those baby steps to make it feel realistic and doable. So, did my choices reflect those beliefs back then? No. And then if not, like, what was I afraid of? I was afraid of failure, right? Like I was afraid to not follow through. And so a lot of the time we can get into that trap of, oh, well, I can just avoid failing altogether if I just like ignore it and I don't set that plan, right? So sometimes we get into that like sticky situation of, oh, well, I want to plan this, but I'm scared to plan it because I'm worried about if I don't do it, then I'm failing. And then I create a meaning about that and who I am. And it falls into this like rabbit hole of doing that. And so getting clear on these areas for ourselves to really lean into, and maybe it's not about the behavior, like the habit that we want to engage in, but our circumstances, what happens around us. How can we support ourselves in looking at our environment and the things that are that and the tools that we are desiring to use to help us be successful with that habit? Because if it's a brand new tool and we jump all the way in the deep end with this brand new tool thinking like it's going to save us and it's going to, I'm like swiping my hands like it's going to be like, all said and done and perfect, then that might be setting us up actually to make it more challenging or more daunting or more fearful to actually follow through on it. So, how can I embody these beliefs just even by 1% more? So, that's why I say this can be tricky, because if we're so focused on the habit and we're just throwing different tools at it, thinking that this tool is going to make me successful, but then we don't follow through, it might not be the habit, it might be the tool that we're trying to use. So really allow ourselves to look at the bigger picture. And rather than doing having like a micro focus in on like I was not successful with that habit that day, broaden your perspective. Let's do a macro focus. Look outward. Look around you. Were there certain circumstances in the day that made it harder to complete that? Like maybe there's a massive snowstorm and when you wanted to go to the gym at 5:30 and you were so set on the gym, and the snowstorm made it a lot harder, but sometimes we don't even think about those factors. Like when I was talking with my client and we were asking, I was asking more details about the surrounding situations. There was definitely hard conversations that she managed before, playing those video games instead of working out. And there were other factors at play that made it more daunting for her to really take those steps. And so really giving yourself those moments to pause and take that step back, look at that get clear on not just focusing on the micro moment and, oh, I just didn't do that one thing with that one habit, and being able to look at it from the lens of, okay, what was surrounding that situation? And also, how realistic was I in thinking that I could complete this? And so this whole conversation is really about noticing how much we're wanting to plan things and maybe jump into planning and creating all these strategies and saying that we're going to plan and organize. But sometimes that's a form of procrastination. And so, really allowing yourselves to pause and look at the bigger picture and say, what is going on around me? How can I set myself up for success, even just 1% more than what I'm doing today, rather than jumping to 50%, 75%, 100%, which kind of leans into that all or nothing of like perfect plan. And I also just want to say this massive perspective shift that was really helpful for me too is sometimes when we make a plan, if we time block our day 100% of the day, the point of the plan is not to follow it 100% of the time. Like the plan is usually to give yourself an understanding of where your time goes, how much time you most likely will need to achieve that thing. And it gives you this perspective to then review it, assess it, and adjust as you go. And there is nothing wrong with that. In all honesty, that's like the number one thing that we all need to lean into when it comes to behavior change. The only way that you're going to be able to have sustainable, long term behavior change is when you can allow yourself to take that radical responsibility to look at your life from the lens of curiosity and compassion and say, okay, I did not follow through on that today. Why did that happen? Rather than falling down that hole of, I can't believe I didn't do that. And I'm mad at myself that I did that. And why can't I stay consistent? Really taking that deep breath and knowing it is okay. You are so human and we're not robots. We're not meant to be following a list, a structure, a plan 100% of the time. But if the plan's in place, giving ourselves that flexible thinking to say, I can shift things around, I can move certain things, I can navigate and be flexible with this plan and give myself the space to play around, have fun with it. And this really gives us the space to say, I can see the areas that the reasons and obstacles that came up with this habit. And it's okay for me to look at this from the lens of, I messed it up today, and that's okay. And so it's really giving ourselves that moment and saying, it's okay to adjust and keep going. So that is what I have for you today. And if you want more details and more strategies that are very simple baby action steps to really help you lean into this and get support along the way, come join the Redefine Collective. It is a beautiful space filled with resources and community. And we also have mentorship. And I hope you have a amazing rest of the week. And if any of this resonated and hit home with you, be sure to send me a message. And if anything, I will see you guys next week.